Today is Chamisha Asa B'Shvat, the 15th day of Shvat, popularly called Tu B'Shvat. A new year for trees. All right. So in the tithing of fruits, this is the year's end or a beginning of a new year. Why is that relevant and meaningful for us as human beings? So there's a pasuk, there's a verse that's found in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19. And the pasuk is, Ki ha'adam eitz hasada, for a person is the tree of the field. And this is a fascinating rumination from our Rebbe, as it's redacted in the Peninim book, page Reish Vav, which is towards the back of the book. After all the parshiot, goes to the Yomim Tovim, and we are going to analyze the question and answer of the Gemara in Masechet Tanit on page 7 in order to derive an inspirational Tu B'Shvat, or Rosh Hashanah Le'ilanot message for everybody. Page Reish Vav Garsinan Masechet Tainus, we learn in the Gemara in Tainus. It's the middle of page 7, side A, smack in the middle. The Gemara tells a story there of the sages feeling a little faint, and he says, okay, I'll teach you something interesting. And he says, Mai dechsiv, what is the meaning of what's written? Ki ha'adam eitz hasada. A person is the tree of the field. And then he goes on to query, V'chi adam eitz sadahu. Is a person really a tree of a field? And what does that mean? A person is a tree of a field. Ela mishum, but rather the chsiv, because it's written, as we mentioned in Parsha Shoftim, it says over there, Ki sochal ki mimenu tochal. The Gemara the Torah there is talking about laying siege on a city. And the Torah gives us instructions about how we lay siege and how warfare must be prosecuted. And the Gemara, the Torah says, Mimenu seichel, v'oisei leisichreis. It's the fruit tree you'll eat from. The fruit tree you shall not cut, shall not chop down. Now, a verse later, verse 20, it says, Oso tashchis, that tree you should cut down. B'choras, cut it away. So the Gemara says, HaKetzad, seems to be a bit of a contradiction. And I'm going to be a spoiler and tell you it's not really much of a contradiction because it's talking about two different kind of trees. One is talking about a fruit tree, one is talking about a non-fruit tree. But proverbially speaking, the Gemara sees this as, if not an open contradiction, somewhat contradictory. A contradictory attitude towards trees. Some trees, don't you dare cut them down. And some trees, go ahead, cut them down. So the Gemara says, what is the deeper message here? It's got to be a deeper message. And as the Mefarshim in the Gemara explained, that the verbiage that the Torah uses, Ki ada ha'adam eitz hasada, because the person is the tree of the field, seems to indicate that it's something that represents a person about a tree. It's not just because people eat from the tree, but it's because the person is a tree, which of course makes for a bit of a contradiction. If a person is a tree, not a fruit, but a person is a tree, so then how could you have a cavalier attitude towards a tree that doesn't bear fruit? So the Gemara says this is the lesson. Im Talmud Chacham Haganu, if this is an appropriate Torah scholar, so then Mimenu Teichal, you should eat or enjoy his fruits. Ve'oisai loisichres, him you shall not cut away. Ve'im lav, what if not? If not what? If he's not a Talmud Chacham? No, if he is a Talmud Chacham, if he is learned, he is educated. However, but he's not Hagan, he's not appropriate. Oisai sashches, if he behaves inappropriately, he's very wise, but behaves inappropriately, cut him away. B'choras, chop him down. So Rashi explains, and the Rebbe here quotes it in the parentheses, Talmidei Chachamim, this talks about the wise, those learned in Torah. Im Hagenhu, if he's a person who's appropriate, Mimenu Teichel, from him you should eat, which means Limud Himenu, learn Torah from him. However, Im Lav, if he's not an appropriate person, what we call in Yiddish a mensch, so then, also sashchis, cut him away, which means sur me'alav, cut him out of your life. Do not learn from him. That's not the kind of person you want as your mentor. It's not the kind of person you want to teach you Torah. Okay, that's the Gemara in a nutshell. So the Rebbe begins his analysis, and he says, what is the question of the Gemara? The Gemara comes with this, V'chi ha'adam eitz hasada, is a person really a tree? I mean, is that such a big question? We find multiple places throughout Torah literature Dvarim Sheinim, different things, different ideas, different ideals. Shebahem Daimim Adam Le'ilan, in which a person is metaphorized in tree-like fashion. And a famous example is the Gemara in Masechet Avot, the Mishnah, in chapter 3, where it says, what would you compare a person who has much knowledge, however, does not have action? Or what would you compare a person who has an enormous amount of action, but not as much knowledge? And the Mishnah goes on to compare it to a person who has a very wide wingspan, so to speak, of branches, a branch span, with very few roots. Or conversely, a person who has lots of deeds has deep roots, but a narrower branch span. And the Mishnah goes on to say, the person with the deep roots, stormy weather comes, doesn't budge. It's well rooted, well founded. Weak roots, in a balmy day, everything's fine. Inclement weather, then you got trouble, the tree can be uprooted. So that's just an example. There are many examples of this. So v'tzarech loymar, we have to say, shekushas haGemara, the question of the Gemara was not, how could you compare a person to a tree? People are compared to lots of things. You can learn a lesson from just about everything. The popular notion that the reason people are compared to a tree is that we can learn a lesson from a tree. This doesn't fit with the Gemara. If we just say it in the Torah, say, okay, fine, it says there's lessons to be learned from a tree. But when the Gemara comes along and says, V'chi ha'adam eitz hasada, Tzarech loymar, the Rebbe says we have to understand the question of the Gemara as such. Milushoyin ha'kosov, from the very way the Scripture couches its message to us, it seems to be intimating not only can a person be metaphorized as a tree, not only can the tree sometimes be the source of lessons or inspiration, as we find in many other lessons, that we learn lessons and inspiration from lots of different things. It seems that a person is a tree. Not that there's a lesson to be learned from a tree. A person is a tree. That's what we're saying. Ki ha'adam eitz hasada. Not meha hasada efsher lilmoid. Not from the tree we can learn a lesson. From the tree we can learn a lesson can be swallowed. But a person is a tree. Now you're in a strange place. A person is a tree? It's ridiculous. A person is not a tree. A tree is a tree, and a person is a person. So this is the Gemara's question. But if that's the Gemara's question, what's the Gemara's answer? Gemara's answer, a person is a tree. Because if he's a wise and educated, learned person, but he's not behaving like a mensch, so then he's like the tree without the fruits. Cut him down. But if he's wise and learned and educated and has absorbed life's lessons from the Torah and he acts like a mensch too, then in that case eat the fruit. So really and truly, we found an example of how we can learn a lesson from a tree. We didn't demonstrate how a person is a tree. The question is, a person is a tree? A person is a person. It can't just be, you can learn a lesson from a tree, because the Gemara would have no really question. Throughout the Gemara, there are many things in which human beings are metaphorized as. But here, the emphasis is, a person is a tree. If that's the question, then the answer comes up short. If a person is a tree, what kind of answer is that? We learn the lesson. A maisala with fruits, yes fruits, no fruits, he is a mensch, he's not a mensch. Like, how does it make him a tree? Tzarech bir, we still need to understand that besides everything else, we didn't talk about all human beings. We talked about a very slender part of the human population. Talmidei Chachamim, the students of the sages, that's not so common. They're not a dime a dozen. So it's not a person is a tree. A Talmud Chacham, you have a lesson to be learned, superimpose tree values over him. So the Rebbe maintained that in a level of pshat, there is not necessarily an answer to this question. There's going to be something missing. But the way we could understand this is through the prism of Chassidus. If we look at this in a mystical way, if we see this in a way which is non-literal, we see this in a way which is speaking to us through the mystical teachings of Judaism, we will see a very profound answer. And it goes like this. This is based on what the Alter Rebbe writes in his famous book of Maimarim, Torah. Right in the beginning. It shows up in Parshas Bereshis, and it's found in many other places. Sugim. There are 4 kinds of life, 4 forms of life. There is daimim, there's the inanimate life, which today we all know from quantum physics is teeming with life. but it seems inanimate on the surface. The mineral reality, the rock reality, the water reality, the chemical reality, the elemental details of the strata of earth are called doimim. They're inanimate. They don't talk, they don't walk, they don't grow, they don't quiver, they don't shake. They just are. They just are. And then there's a different segment of reality, and that's a segment of reality called semeach, the vegetative segment of reality. Everything from redwood trees to moss. It grows. Doesn't stay in one place. Continuously grows and develops. The next level of the segment of life is called animal life, chai. Animal life not only teems, not only grows, but it's independent life. It can be uprooted. It goes from place to place. It's life which is not rooted in a particular space. It doesn't require nourishment from an exact spot of geography. And then finally there's medaber. Then there's the reality of the human being, a different form of life. From an atheistic perspective, a human being is just another warm-blooded mammal. From a Torah perspective, it's totally wrong-headed. A human being is a unique form of life. There is nothing like it. There are many forms of life, only one human being. Only a human being is endowed with self-consciousness. Only a human being has the ability to know its creator or to rebel against him. Only a human being can choose to be righteous or evil. So the Alter Rebbe says that these four examples of life, or four dimensions of life, are also found within each and every human being. As it says, Olam Katan, Zeha Adam, a famous Medrash Tanchuma, in Parshas Pekudei, it makes a statement like that. The whole world is reflected in every single human being. As the Mashal of Chassidus goes, just like the entire disk of the sun can be reflected in a single droplet of water. The whole world is reflected in every human being means Shekoiches hanefesh shala adam, that the wherewithal of a person's spiritual wherewithal and reality, mechulakim l'dalet sugim, are divided into four dimensions, four segments. There is doimim, there is the inanimate part of life, there's the vegetative part of life, there's the animal part of life, and finally, the human expression. Umevarsham, he explains there. The bechinas hatzomeach sheba adam, what is, in the metaphor, vegetative? He says vegetation, this is the idea of the midas shebelev, of the emotional well-being of a person, the emotional characteristics that are rooted in the heart. Bechinas hachai, if we talk about the animal segment of a human soul, that's the seichel. That's a person's intelligence. The intelligence is not rooted in one place. What's the difference between the tzameach and a chai, between a vegetative and animal life? And again, it could be like, we could be talking about redwood trees or moss that grows. We could be talking about an ant or talking about a rhinoceros. It's all forms of animal life versus forms of vegetation. But both share a common denominator. Hachayis shebetzemeach, the vegetative life, is limited. Le'inyan hatzmicha mekatnas legadlus. It can only grow in one dimension. It starts small and it can grow larger. It can keep getting larger, but that's all it can do. It can't pick itself up and go to a different place. It doesn't have self-determination in any way, shape, or form. All it can do is grow. That's why it's called tzemeach, which means a growth. Mashenkim balchai, in sharp contrast, the animal life, teeming life, milvadat smicha, besides that animals, just like trees, grow and become larger, from katnas to gadlus, from a very, very small size to a larger size, yesh gam bechinas tenua, they are also endowed with movement. They can move, they can go, they can travel. The animal does not remain in one place. The reason that zoos have bars is because animals don't remain in one place. You can't plant the elephants in the ground and expect them to happily keep growing. You don't need bars around the trees. You need bars around the animals. And that's because the animals are ever in a state of flux, of movement. They have the gift of tenua. We have the same distinction between a person's emotional well-being and intellectual well-being. B'mides yesh tzmicha mekatnos legadlus. In the realm of midot, in the realm of emotional well-being or development of a person, your midot can grow. You cannot compare the emotional wellness of a child to the emotional wellness or health of an adult. The child loves small things. The adult loves big things or bigger things. The older you get, hopefully, the more refined you become. The more or better the things you're interested in having and different kinds of experiences you want to push away and rule out. When we talk about intelligence, it's not just a question of a more mature form. That's like bechinas chai, that's like animal life. Sheyesh beitnua. A person can actually migrate. They can move intellectually from one area to the next. They can have a different attitude towards life. They can see things in a different way. You can re-educate somebody. You cannot change their midas. You can make their midas more sophisticated. The midas are midah. A person who is intellectually endowed is not limited to understanding things in one dimension. The realm of intellect is not monochromatic. It's necessarily able to move and develop in many directions. And it has the ability to incorporate many different colors, many different possibilities. You could person that can look at one thing and see benevolence, a need for kindness. I could understand the case for tolerance. And then be'inyan sheni, in another area, the seichel could be mechayev lahachmer. The same person, the same mind, can have a different view of it and can see it not as a reason or cause for tolerance, but rather as a cause for intolerance. A person can see it as something which requires tremendous and absolute restraint and a zero acceptance policy. Mashen can have midas mugbalas. The midas are limited. They're limited to their place, to their madrega. HaChesed le'ishtana le'gvura. The thing that's chesed will never become gvura. Chesed is always going to be chesed. Benevolence is benevolence. The child will share his candy or share his piece of cake. The adult will share his bank account. But that's what it does. Out of chesed, one shares. Out of gvura, one says no, one restrains. It's always going to be the same. It doesn't intrinsically change. In fact, you can look at small children, you can see their behavior emotionally, and you can look at people when they grow up, and it's not intrinsically different. The same traits, the same character traits. Very giving people were very giving as children. People who were very disciplined were very precise and exacting as children also. But when it comes to thinking, a person's ability to think or perspectives on life, the intellectual ability, how you look at things, the vast shift. We have even in Torah something called a Mishnah Rishonah, Mishnah Shniya. So you have a great sage, and sometimes they explain things one way, they looked at things, they paskin the halacha one way, and then later on they paskin differently. We have multiple examples of the Rambam where he writes one thing in the Pirush HaMishnayos and later rules differently in his magnum opus Mishnah Torah, and it's called Mishnah Shniya. That was his second approach, his second way of learning. He learned one way as a young person. He learned differently as an adult. We follow Mishnah Shniya. We say the following way of learning, or the last way of learning, was the final way of learning. That was the final conclusion. So people can change. They can change the way they think. They can't really change the way they feel. They can modify the way they feel. They can direct the way they feel. They can enhance the way they feel. Cannot change the way they feel. Your midas are your midas. That's your nature. So we see that one is vegetative, meaning rooted to the same spot, only growing, becoming more sophisticated, but not intrinsically changing, like a tree which is rooted in the ground. And the other is like animal life. Now, in view of all this, let's return to the Gemara. What does the Gemara ask when it says, is a person a tree, we say? The Teyar Adam, when we talk about a human being, so a human being, what makes a human being intrinsically different from all other forms of life? What does science call a human being? The scientific nomenclature for a human being is Homo sapien. What's a Homo sapien? Homo is life. What's sapien? Is Latin for wisdom, as in the English word sapiens. So a Homo sapien means a wise animal, a wise form of life. The difference between people and animals have no wisdom per se. Even the cleverest fox never wrote a poem. He jumped over the fence, he never wrote a poem. The wisest porpoise could not write a thesis. But he can be very clever. He can figure out how to get away from traps. He can figure out how to get his food. But he's not intrinsically wise. He doesn't have wisdom. Wisdom is a human thing. Besides the fact that a human being is endowed with intelligence, from all the names a person is called, the name Adam is symbolic of intelligence. Adam, which means Adame in the image of, is similar to, it reflects the notion of intelligence. Ish, for example, represents the idea of midot. And Gever and Enosh are weaklings in one or both areas. Enosh is weak, and the Gever fixes the Enosh and turns him into an Ish or an Adam. But the point is that Adam, of all the different expressions that describe the human being, Adam is the one that bespeaks the intelligence, human consciousness. And this is what the Gemara asks. V'chi Adam eitz asada? Is an Adam a tree? How did a person become vegetation? Vegetation is not a human being. A human being's virtue is life, adaptive life. The human being's virtue is that he can adapt, he can live in different places. Different animals are indigenous to different places. That's where they live. On their own, they cannot pick themselves up and migrate somewhere. Human beings can adapt to any reality. And we have, and we do. And that's the Gemara's question. Adam is a sada? A tree? Umetaretz, the Gemara answers, yeah, an Adam is a tree. Where do you see that? Where do you see that a human being's virtue is to be found in the area of vegetation? And the answer is, look at Talmud Chacham. Let's say he's a wise person. So you're talking about a person who's used the intelligence that God gives him in the maximum way, fully developed the powers of intellect. And now he learned a lot of Torah. So, is he a Hagun? Is he a mensch also? Does he have proper midot? Then Mendel teichel, eat his fruit. Don't cut him out of your life. Keep him in your life. V'imlav, here's a person who's developed the human ability to think, to comprehend, to grasp, to understand. But he's not a mensch? He's not Hagun? In that case, get rid of him. In other words, what we're saying is, the shleimus of Mailas HaSeichel, when do you see that a human being has maximized the possibility of his or her intellect? When does human intellect really and truly show itself to be a virtuous thing? When it expresses itself in the areas of menschlichkeit, in the area of the humanities. And the humanities are menschlichkeit. That it has a proper midot. In other words, if you have a person who has a lot of wisdom, but is not a mensch, doesn't have proper midot, doesn't have to behave properly, then this is a person whose intellect is faulty. The virtue of intellect is only if it radiates, shines, and illuminates the concept of one's midot, of one's interaction with others. Otherwise, it's all wrong. That's the Gemara says. The Gemara says, is a person like vegetation? Is that the virtue of a person? And what's the Gemara's answer? Yes, that's exactly what a person is. There was a country in Eastern Europe in which the people were the most educated per capita of any other country in the entire world. They produced more philosophers, more musical composers, more scientists. They had better lawyers and sharper accountants. Better than any other country in the world. And that was the country that spawned the most beastly and inhumane, animalistic society that the world has ever known. Now I'm talking, of course, about Germany. Because what was the emphasis on? Intellectual achievement and accomplishment, but not about menschlichkeit, not about kindness, not about compassion, not about sensitivity, not about respect. It was uns über alles. We are better than everything else. So we see from this very, very prime example that if the wisdom, if the knowledge, if the education doesn't become translated into the menschlichkeit, then it's not a human being at all. And that's ve'adam eitz hasada. Today we live in a Western civilization where we have academic excellence, but we're not producing mention. There's no mention of God, there's no mention of decency, there's no mention of real superlative human qualities, because a human being can only really be a mensch when he develops his neshama, develops his soul. And this is the problem with our society today. It's what the Rebbe spoke about, every school having a moment of silence, starting a day with reflection. Because in addition to teaching arithmetic and the sciences, In addition to teaching anthropology and history, a school has to teach children to be a mensch. That the virtue of being a mensch is paramount, is overriding. And that was the Gemara's question. And that's what makes Chamisha Asar B'Shvat a very important day for us to celebrate, for us to observe, because today is the day that we remind ourselves that academic excellence simply doesn't cut it. In order for us to keep people in our lives, in order for a human being to be all you can be, a person indeed has to be an Eitz HaSada, a tree in the field.
So, man.